officers as we have in the previous 5 years. So that's my big update for tonight. I've been not in work a lot the last couple weeks, so I'm not sure exactly what's been happening around the department, but overall for the police department, pretty quiet holidays and New Year's. Thankfully, there was a trooper that was killed out on 509 that we did a lead investigation on. And then we did, unfortunately, have a sergeant pass away at home from a medical incident. But those are kind of the two big things for us. So overall, pretty quiet holiday in the police department. So, any questions? Yeah.
Yes. Were you able to locate that second vehicle by chance?
So that's a good question. I know they found one of them and it was impounded, and there was discussion to exactly how many vehicles they were looking for. From my understanding, there's still potentially one outstanding vehicle. I'm not quite sure.
And did you get an explanation for why they didn't stop?
No. If there has been an explanation given, that it is not public knowledge.
Got it.
Yeah, as part of the investigation.
Thank you very much, Luke.
Thank you.
Next up, Josh from the Fire Department.
Well, good evening, everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Do you need me to do this?
No, I can. I'll just walk over. It's not a big deal. So, thank you, though. I'm actually looking forward to the New Year. December was a little rough on me. I'll just tell you a personal story. I got the shingles. Of all places, to my face, to where my eye was still completely shut. So, one of the most physical things I've ever experienced. And so, I will say, if you're 50 years old, get the shingles shot. It'll save you a lot of pain. So, anyways, Happy New Year, guys. So, looking over call volume, we were trending so well in 2025. And in fact, if you guys look, the one number I always pay attention to is this one right here. We've been trending down almost every single month. And unfortunately, this is compared to last year, so 2024 versus 2025. And so if you look at 2024 numbers, we were historically have been down almost the entire time. Unfortunately, this last December, we were up call volume a little bit compared to 2024 by about 15%. So, but all in all, we've been doing pretty good. In fact, so much so, I figured I'd report out on what the department's call volume was. And so we actually ran 51,680 incidents, which is about 1,000 calls less than we did in 2024. So pretty good stuff. So we're definitely trending the right way, and I think a lot of that is education for when is it appropriate to call 911, people taking care of themselves. We also have a program called CARES, if you guys have never heard of CARES before, and their sole purpose is to do basically case management work with people who overuse the 911 system and get them the proper resources so that they can call 911. So I have the pleasure of managing them or serving alongside them, and they do amazing work. So last time I was here, I kind of mentioned that Station 13 had opened, but I hadn't gotten the chance to actually look at the station after they did the renovations to it. So I dropped by there on Christmas. It's kind of a tradition that I do. I drop by every station on Christmas Day, and I drop off goodies. This year was pies. So I get to see all the crews. I get to thank them for their service and spending the time taking care of our community and taking care of you guys. And so when I went to Station 13, though, I noticed that they had this. They all chipped in money, and this is their dining table. And so I thought that was pretty cool. I thought I'd share that with you. In addition, let me tell you that the job they did is absolutely beautiful. The floor that they redid, all the plumbing and everything, the bathroom remodel, they did an excellent job of renovating Station 13, your Proctor District Station. So it looks great. Talk about blood. I feel like I talk about blood a lot, but they tell me what I talk about, so here I am. Let me talk about it. January is National Blood Donor Month, as you can kind of see there. And let me tell you, it's easy to be a hero. Save lives. Donate like me. But why give blood? And honestly, probably one of the biggest things, and I'll say it so you don't have to read the slide, is every 2 seconds in the United States, somebody needs blood. And they need blood for a variety of different things. for trauma reasons, for medical reasons, cancers. And in fact, every time I get blood, I have the Bloodworks Northwest app, and they actually text me and tell me, like, hey, you have a thank you. And the thank you is typically the person who received the blood. And the 2 times I've given blood was for cancer kids at Seattle Children's Hospital.
Yeah.
And so that just breaks my heart, just knowing that I was giving that. So that's my why. Let's get back to the community. It's easy, right? And you know, it's a simple way. There's no cost. You don't need no special skills. It does require time, but that's the downside. You gotta log in. You
So,
gotta
well,
go
Richard,
down there.
what is the case between you and your ex-wife?
So call to action, give blood if you can, not everybody can. And then schedule a blood donation with Bloodworks Northwest, is who we partnered with. In fact, our whole program by the end was actually it was a collective care health system. And also Bloodworks Northwest, obviously, Pierce County EMS, Central Pierce Fire and Rescue.
There was
and
a contentious relationship
we
there,
got our,
but I don't feel like it was something that really stood out as like to
somebody
the top.
always asks me,
Like, oh
I
my
don't
gosh,
like
these
to go
guys
to
are
blood
really.
bus. Unfortunately, if you want to go to blood bus, you have brick and mortar, they have to travel a little bit. Federal Way is the closest one. And so I put that address up there, because every time I talk about blood, somebody's always like, I don't want to go on the bus. I don't like to ride buses either, so I get it. So, I already talked a little bit about a blood program, but I did want to give you guys some updated numbers. So we started our blood program, out-of-hospital blood program, in January of 23rd of last year. And 106 administrations of whole blood or blood products have been given between Central Pierce Fire and Rescue and Tacoma Fire. And I kind of focus more on the Tacoma Fire one, so we've had 63 of those 106, 29 traumas. We've had 32 medical, which blows everybody's mind. We're like, what? How is medical getting more blood than what a trauma patient was? You'd think it'd be pretty much all trauma, but there are so many GI bleeds, gastrointestinal bleeds out there, and other reasons people are anemic. And we simply recognize that based off our training, and we treat appropriately, and we honestly are saving lives left and right. So pretty awesome stuff. And there's also 2 OBGYNs. It's something like 1 in every 83 pregnancies require blood administration. So that fact like blew my mind when I read that. So just thought I'd pass that on. So blood's definitely needed. And last time I was here in November, police was kind of just like, we don't have a fancy PowerPoint slide or anything like that. So I wanted to make sure I could do that. But you know what, I actually want to give them a shout out for our whole blood program. And the reason I say that is our teams, the EMS, the fire department, we cannot go out there and do our job on these trauma scenes and motor vehicle wrecks and all those things if it wasn't for the work of the police department. They do such an amazing job for us. They protect us. Some of these scenes are incredibly chaotic. I read every blood report. And out of all those 63 blood reports, there's about a handful of them where the scene was so chaotic. PD was literally forming a wall barrier so we could work on the patient and save that life. And so thank you, PD, for your work. Not to mention, PD also a lot of times starts initial treatment that doesn't get recognized. And what I mean by that is if you got a extremity, like an arm or a leg that's bleeding out significantly because they were just shot or stabbed, what do they need? They need a tourniquet. Guess who has tourniquets? Tacoma Police Department does. And they put that on and they begin that life-saving measure before you can get there and start early. So from the bottom of my heart, Tacoma Fire Department, thank you, Tacoma Police Department, for what you do. So, this is where we want my lunch break.
Any questions for Josh?
Letting you get off, so.
I like it. I'm not sure, the other one doesn't seem to be working yet, but. And a round of applause for the fire department. Is John James on the Zoom connection? Can we bring John up?
Yes, I'm here.
See if this is going to work. So, success, good. John. Okay, John, you're up.
It's always an honor and privilege.
Oh, we're not hearing you yet. Wait a minute. We're working on it.
Check 1, check 2.
Still not hearing you. Back to the drawing board. We thought we had a good plan. So while Josh is working on that, just a little word on the liaison program. We are allocated about 10 or 15 liaisons from all the different parts of the city, from the health department, from the library, from schools. So we have regular reports from 3 or 4 who want to come every meeting. But if ever anybody has a specific interest on another issue, they're all able to answer those questions and willing to come to the meeting. So, how are we doing with getting John up? We're not.
If you can make a public announcement.
Yes, we have a public announcement.
So I live off of North Union, and I've noticed so much junk we put on the city property, left for people to, or free. But no one comes and picks it up. So if you know of anybody, please advise that at city property, there's no junk that supposed to be put out there. Or it looks like junk. It is junk. And so we ended up picking up a lot last month. So he's
muted.
And they said, you want to put it out there, we gotta pick it up. Thank you.
Let's try.
Can you hear me now?
Well, it must be coming out of the computer.
Can you try one more time?
Can you try one more time,
Can you hear
Joe?
me now?
I can hear that.
One more time.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
This is why I love this meeting. It always just feels like a family reunion, but happy to be here. And always, my name is John, for those of you that don't know me, Community Relations Manager with Tacoma Public Utilities. Every first Monday, I do have another meeting, and sometimes it's just easier for me to be able to attend both meetings if I'm virtual. And so that's why I'm virtual this evening. I just want to give a quick shout out to the police department. My brother just retired from a local police department after 25 years. So thank you so much for your service. I appreciate you. And we do need to hire more great police officers. With that being said, I want to give just a quick update. I know there were some recent power outages, and I always receive emails when there's power outages. And I'm probably the worst person to email because I might have a power outage myself, and I'm typically at home. I do have a cell phone number that I'll leave with you all that you can always text me, but there's a way to track your power outages. And I sent this link to Peter, and Peter, I can send it again. But if you go to TPU customer portal, you will be able to monitor power outages. But not only that, it's a way you can manage your payments, access billing information, and just monitor your overall usage. In January, I typically begin to plan just outreach for the year and events for the summer. This year, I've been thinking about different themes and different things I want to talk about and expose the community in regards to utility. So if there's topics that you are more interested in, I know last year Peter mentioned you all wanted to hear more about Tacoma Power Operations, an in-depth presentation. And so I do plan to have someone from Tacoma Power join me this year. It is a budget year as well, so we'll present on that later in the year. But there's specific topics, utility related, that you're all interested in, please reach out to me. You could probably access my email on the North End Neighborhood website, and I'll be happy to help coordinate and bring one of our experts to share more information with you.
Anything else, John, or open for a question? I guess he's not hearing us.
Any questions, Peter?
No, I think you're off the hook, John.
Okay.
Next up, Alyssa from the Parks Department, from Tacoma Parks.
Parks Tacoma, in that order.
Parks Tacoma.
Yes, I'm Elisa O'Hanlon-Regala from Parks Tacoma. We rebranded last year, so we're still trying to get over the Metro Parks. We put $1 in every time we mess that up. The biggest thing that I will share tonight is that the first board meeting of the new year is next Monday, and the board will be considering a resolution to put a bond measure before the voters on the April special election ballot. So that bond measure in December, we had a citizens committee make a recommendation that the park board consider this resolution. That citizens committee recommended a package that would be no more than $155 million over a 6-year period. The bond package that we're currently finishing out was adopted by the voters or approved by the voters back in 2014, and that was a 10-year, or because of pandemic, has turned into more like a 12-year measure. So should the board next Monday decide to put that measure before the voters in April, then the next thing you'll start hearing is facts and information and the details about that measure. So if you don't mind holding your questions about any details, because it hasn't taken action yet, but yeah, lots of information will come out should that be the action that the board decides to take next Monday. And it's been a busy season. We always have things going on, nature walks, all times of year, things in our community centers. So I hope you are web savvy, technical savvy, because that's the best place to get information on all the activities that there are through Parks Tacoma. Any questions?
Questions for Alyssa? Yeah, go ahead.
So this is kind of a big question. I don't know if there's been if you've covered this in a prior meeting. So I love the parks. I think Tacoma Parks are wonderful, and I like the social media stuff you guys are doing. I have been distressed to read the news headlines about the deficit. And I'm wondering if that, I mean, I'd love to know how we got to that place. And I'm sure we don't have time to answer all of that tonight. But I think that should be considered when you're thinking about asking, I mean, so fiscal management, before we start asking for more money.
And you do bring up a good point that I meant to make, and we will remind folks of this. A bond is different. It pays for capital, for building things, than does the operations money, is where the deficit came from. And yes, if you have specific questions about the operations, and that's funded through property taxes and how that's all funded, I would say go ahead and share specific questions, and then we can prepare some information that speaks more focused to the kinds of questions you might have. But I also take to heart your point about being clear and helping folks understand how we're funding everything when we talk to folks about funding capital.
Let's give a round of applause to Parks. We do appreciate Alyssa comes every month to come and speak to us, so we appreciate that. Christina Khan is normally speaks on behalf of the City Manager's Office. She's given up her time, so we're going to move straight into City Council. So Sarah and John, we've even got 2 microphones if you want one each. This is sort of scary stuff.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone had a great winter break. And if you're a teacher, you're back to school. And if you're working, you're back. And some of you had to work because we need you to be working. I'm Sarah Rumba. I'm the council member for District 2, which is part of the North End Neighborhood Council area. And I just want to say hi to a whole bunch of people I recognize in the audience today. It's so nice to see you today. Hi, Diane. I'm going to just give an update on, well, first off, I'm sure some people were curious about why the light was flashing on 705. It just stopped working. stopped working at 7:05 and 5:09. Did people see it flashing this weekend? Yeah. So I was really worried about that, and I got a hold of the deputy city manager, as well as I talked to Representative Phi, and it's a larger issue. We got it working again, but it's a bigger issue. And so I want to say that I want it to get fixed, but we need to work with the state, because the state actually owns that infrastructure, but I saw them out there today working on it, so I really appreciate our city for being active and trying to be ahead of something. I did see one accident, but I'm not there all day, every day, so I don't know how many accidents there actually were. So I just want to share with you some of the things I'll be working on with our Community Vitality and Safety committee that I chair. And so there are 4 members and 1 alternate. And so I chair it, and we have a vice chair. And some of the things that I'm really concerned about are around hunger with young people. I've been following this for the last year. And since the new library opened up, the main library opened up again, it's really obvious to me that we have areas of our city that are activated for kids, but there's no food. And one of those areas is the complete downtown area. There's a lot of kids in downtown, there's schools, and we just don't have food for them at the times when they may not be in school. So that would be maybe on breaks, after school for sure. So it's something that I'm going to really prioritize to make sure that we work with other providers that do this work to figure out how we can fill those holes. So if any of you are interested in that subject, I'd love to talk to you about it, because I'd love to get some ideas from you of things that you think I might not be thinking about. I don't know everything, and I rely on my policy analyst to help me with that as well, but community really is the best place to be to get this information. The next thing is domestic violence and sexual assault, making sure we don't forget how that is tied to homelessness. And since homelessness is one of the #1 things I've been working on for 4 years, I was in council, and before that for several, 10 or 12 years, I really want to make sure that we focus on some of the things that make homelessness happen. And so domestic violence is really tied to youth violence and tied to homelessness. And so as a city, not investing in those things, I think would be detrimental. So we need to, even though we know we have a deficit coming, we need to make sure we're working on preventative things as well as the reactionary emergencies that we have as a city. And then the other thing, so I already talked about homelessness. Juvenile justice is another thing I'm really supporting, us moving forward to support the county on a new juvenile justice building, the Raymond Hall. And then tied to everything that we're doing is really looking at how we support therapeutic and community court. So there's other options for things to do. It's going to involve being creative, stepping outside of a box we might see as how we handle things, and being really working with community on solutions and the partners that we already have. So those are some of the things I'll be working on. I don't want to take up too much time, so you're not here till 9 o'clock at night. So I'm going to pass this over to Councilmember Hines.
Sounds good. Start working. There we go. Good evening, everyone. John Hines, Councilmember District 1, so the other half of the North End. Happy New Year. Good to see some familiar faces. With Sarah's point, I'll try to keep this brief. I know the mayor's going to come up and answer a lot of your questions. So 2 things to highlight at the end of last year, if you may have missed it. Number 1, we adopted Tacoma 2035, which is kind of our long-term strategic plan for the next 10 years in the city. We did Tacoma 2025 back in 2015. And so thinking about what the next 10 years look like. One innovation that we did this year with 2035 is instead of doing a separate process as kind of standalone, we wrapped in all the other conversations we were having, home in Tacoma, community safety strategy, community safety plans, all the community outreach processes we were having this last year. We kind of gathered data, what do people want to see in the city of Tacoma in the next 10 years. We used that to put together Tacoma 2035. Council approved that at our last meeting in December. The other thing was we adopted our community safety action strategy at the end of the year, which is kind of our comprehensive vision on what we think safety is in the community. Again, that was grounded in talking to lots of people about what does safety mean. Is it police and fire? Yes, it's police and fire, but what else is it? And really getting to that idea of what does it make so people feel safe in their community. Something I'm really passionate about is litter, trash, and graffiti, as many people know, because I think that a street that has no litter, a street that has no graffiti, a street that has neighbors who are active in picking those things up. It's a neighborhood that feels safer, right? So that's my piece of it, but it's broader than that. We adopted that last year. Looking ahead, 2 things to talk about. We're just starting out. We have a new mayor and a new council member joining us, so a lot of the kind of next month or so is us getting together, people getting appointed new commissions and committees and things like that. The mayor will talk a little bit about this evening. So not a lot of big updates right now, but 2 things to talk about. Number 1, of interest in the North End Neighborhood Council meeting, our urban forestry kind of update is coming back to IPS in January, correct, Christina? Yes. So for the people interested in trees, tree canopy, urban forestry, that presentation is coming back to the Infrastructure Planning and Sustainability Committee sometime in January. 28th. There you go. And then also around that same time is something I've been passionate about is the adaptive reuse of wood products. So when trees are cut down, we hope they don't get cut down, but if they are cut down, how do we make sure they end up to something more than just wood chips? And so we had brought a consultant on board to look at what it would look like to do kind of an urban forestry wood reclamation project, like what that would look like from beginning to end. The city of Baltimore and Maryland has a really cool program. The city has its own lumber mill, and they hire people to like mill trees that are cut down on city property, private property, and do things. Actually, it's a project that uses a lot of people that are recently incarcerated to do some of that work. So that's kind of one end of like an idea that's out there. So we hired a consultant, Cambria Carbon, to come in and kind of tell us what that would look like. So we'll be talking about that in January too. Otherwise, I am, at least for right now, unless Sarah and the rest of the committees depose me, the chair of the Government Performance and Finance Committee.
Yeah, we're gonna get rid of you.
And, well, that being said, no. It is a budget and rates year this year in the city. So we have a 2-year budget. And so this year, as we go through the rest of this year, will be us talking about our 2-year budget here in the city. It's also a year when we set the rates for the utilities. It happens at the same time. So that will be a conversation that my committee and the whole council will be having for the next 12 months.
Okay, I forgot to mention something. I was talking to our fire representative right there, and he forgot to mention that TAPCO Credit Union out on 19th, every month they're going to be doing a blood bank with the fire department. So if you want to find out when that is, just go to the Tacoma Fire Department website. You will find it there.
And I know you'll have lots of questions, but we'll save those for the main speaker. I see Peter, he wasn't hooked. Thank you all very much.
Jennifer.
Hi everybody, Jennifer Young. I'm your Community Liaison Officer for the university, and I just wanted to remind you about a few things. Big deal tomorrow, we're doing Washington State Legislative Preview here on campus over the concert hall, Schneebeck Concert Hall. It's almost sold out. If you're going, I recommend you get there a little bit early so you can secure your seat and we can start promptly. So just a note on that. I think we have like 470 people registrations in, so very popular event. Another event that's going to be coming up to celebrate MLK is we will have Bishop Cedric Richworth speaking again on campus January 22nd. So you might make note of that event as well. Our MLK events do very well and are quite popular. I do have with me today little cards if you want to subscribe to things that are going on campus. I have them in the back, or if you want to take a poster, you're more than welcome to. So come find me after if you would like. Thank you.
And John mentioned budgeting. We actually January meeting, we were going to talk about the budget, but we have a new mayor, and the new mayor agreed to come and speak to us. So he bumped the budget to another meeting. So I would like to, can we have a big round of applause for our new mayor? And we have got a lot of questions. We had a big response back. So the board has read every single question that was sent in. We've sort of got the best of the best. So after Anders does his presentation, we have a number of questions we'll be posing to him. So welcome. Thank you.
Very good. Hey, good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. Hey, thank you so much. I see a lot of friends, familiar faces, and some new friends here too. It's really nice to be here, and thank you so much for the hospitality, the water, the kind invite. My name is Anders Ibsen. I'm honored to be your next mayor. I'm also a North End resident myself. I live off of North 21st Street. former district representative for District 1, currently held by Councilman Hines, and also a former NENC board member back in the day too, from 2009, 2011. So a lot has changed, but a lot of the same familiar dedication is really wonderful. So I've told you a little bit about who I am. Here's what I'm really focused on doing. So it's no secret what people in our city care about. There are a lot of concerns top of mind, but the biggest ones that came to mind were people's desire to feel safe in their own neighborhood and the recurring issues that we have with housing, stability, gentrification, and homelessness, and what we can do to not just simply respond and react, but how we can actually get on top of these recurring problems on a structural level. And longer term, what we can do to actually build opportunity in a way that's more generative, more living wage, so we're not constantly dealing with budget crises time after time, year after year. So those are some of my biggest priorities, because for me, on just a values level, what it really comes down to isn't simply responding to problems and even simply outlining policy points. Policy really matters, of course, but it means speaking to the larger issues too, which is how can we as a city, instead of being risk averse, how can we dare to think bigger and innovate? How can we follow through on things and create a culture where people expect us and trust us to follow through on what we say we're going to do? And then finally, how can we be not just an island in a sea of different jurisdictions and federal, state, local agencies and what have you, but how can we actually be a regional leader who brings everyone along, be they neighboring cities, the county, working in closer conjunction with the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, making sure that we're working together regionally with our state and local delegations, especially now with all the federal chaos that we're having to endure. How can we do all these things and really lead? Because that's what cities do at their best. So in no particular order, what I'm really interested in tackling this year, starting the progress, in a lot of respects is building on previous successes. So it looks like our liaisons might still be here or there or whatnot, but for example, with the issue of homelessness, one of your liaisons actually, Councilmember Rumba, with what she took point on last quarter, which I'm really interested in bird dogging, is the identification of what are called low barrier shelter sites. So more places, especially not just in the city limits, but within the county as well, so there's a more sustainable dispersion, so that people actually get the help they need and beginning to unburden the system as well. So that's something I'm very supportive of. But not every person in those situations goes into a shelter. It doesn't make sense for some people, whether it's a family or you have a cherished pet, or for whatever reason, shelter just doesn't feel safe or just doesn't work for your situation. So something that the city and the county are starting to have discussions about, and that I intend to champion, is a single coordinator for what's called safe parking. Because the unfortunate reality is that a lot of the homeless that you see, you don't see. But there are a lot of what I call working class homeless who, they might be gig workers. I mean, there's a non-zero chance you go to a big box store, you go to a cafe, and your cashier or your barista is living in a car or serving couches. And that's not acceptable. And so meeting people where they are so that people actually get the help they need to do better for themselves is taking a look at alternative places where people are. So if people are, unfortunately, in a situation where they are living in their car, can we provide for safe spaces that are clean, that have sanitation, that have social workers on site where they can be connected to services so they can do better? And the thing is, this is already happening, but it's really helter-skelter. There are hundreds of churches, it's mostly faith organizations who've taken the lead. I live next to one of them. Me and John are actually neighbors. We live right on 6th and Orchard. That's not safe parking, but it's the same principle. But what I'm really interested in seeing is, can the city and the county work together on having a single point of coordination so that we can basically herd the cats in a more efficient and effective manner to help more people. Those are just a few examples. I'm also a very big fan of what the city of Fife is doing, providing actual paid work opportunities for homeless individuals to clean up public spaces. That's just such a triple win in so many great ways. So the list is very long, but those are some of the high points from on that. When it comes to public safety, we are confirming a police chief pretty soon. Interim Chief Jackson is won tremendous respect from a lot of people, from the rank and file officers, from members of the community. And as we finalize that process, ensuring that we're continuing to march forward towards a fully staffed police department. And also, one of the first things we're going to vote on tomorrow is additional public safety funding. So how can we not simply react and respond to the recurring problems at TPD with just burnout? I mean, it's just a very young department. I mean, the average officer there has been there less than 5 years in the profession. And it's just not sustainable that these poor folks are just having to constantly go through overtime because the staffing just isn't there, let alone what happens to other programs that are really valuable, like the Community Liaison Officer program, The school district wants additional support from law enforcement, for example. So what we can do to stem those problems while paving the way towards longer-term success and not just reacting to crises, but longer-term solutions too that build community. Same thing with fire. It's no secret that there's a staffing issue. There's also very much an equipment issue with TFD. The apparatuses, the fire trucks that get called to scenes, a lot of them don't work half the time. And so there's just tremendous problems that people can sometimes face both within the department and, what that means for people having to be on call. So we're going to take a look at what that looks at long term with public safety funding, while also having an eye towards longer term systematic solutions. So something that Councilmember Rumbaugh referred to is therapeutic court, which for those who don't know, is an alternative to the traditional incarceration system where instead of going to jail for doing something, maybe you're just a dumb kid who made a mistake, or maybe there's something else going on, like substance or mental health issues. And there's still a need for accountability, obviously. We're not letting people off the hook. I mean, we've lost retailers for that reason of recurring property crime. But isn't it so much, not just simply compassionate, but so much more effective if there's a long-term path for holding people accountable, but with an alternative to the traditional carceral system for those who are willing to go through and to do the hard work. And so therapeutic court has been tried in a lot of places. It is in a very limited scale right now in Tacoma. But where it has worked, it's worked very well. The jail diversion rate of people who stay out of the criminal justice system who don't reoffend is absurd. It's like over 90% where it's been tried in Tacoma. And incidentally, one of the major votes that we have tomorrow is appointing a municipal court judge to replace the retiring Drew Hinkey. The gentleman that we're going to be taking a look at, his name is Sergio Cuellar Flores, who is a former city prosecutor and also a former prosecutor for the city of Auburn, where he basically did just that. He helped build up a very robust mental health, DV, veterans drug, therapeutic court system. And it's not for everyone. We're not talking about violent felons. We're talking about non-violent people who are at the highest probability of not reoffending if they're given another chance with firm accountability attached to it. So it's not going to be easy, but properly done, it could be very effective. And I think that's something definitely worth exploring. For the good of our community, for the good of public safety, accountability, and also saving the taxpayers in a really tough budget here. Those are a few other such examples. And then finally, building a robust economic base. Councilman Hines mentioned a really interesting idea about the better utilization of wood products with adaptive reuse. That's actually something called out in one of the other adopted plans, which I'm a very big fan of, that I also want to run with, which is our city's Green Jobs Program. It's not just simply, which I think is a very misleading title, because it's really about what we can do better economically. So one of the things specifically called out in this plan for things that Tacoma could focus on to have a better job outlook, a better robust private sector base, manufacturing focus, is what's called industrial symbiosis, which is, I'm just a huge nerd about this kind of stuff, but it's basically how can we reuse things, how can we produce products that are needed by local businesses or agencies. So for example, another example of construction materials would be what's called cross-laminated timber, which increasingly some skyscrapers, larger buildings in downtown cores are being built with, which is a fire-resistant wood product, which has a lot of environmental benefits. It's a good way to preserve resource land and preserve it from sprawl, for instance. And it's also just a good way of employing local people with living wage work and creating pathways. So those are just one of the very, very small tip of the iceberg. There's a growing list of things I want to work on. There's no shortage of things for us to do. But what unites us all is our love for our community, our profound excitement at doing the best good that we can for the greatest number of people. And I'm really excited about working with my council, working with all of you to enact these and other changes to improve our city and to build and restore trust and confidence in what we can do together. So with that is just the tip of the iceberg. Many more things to accomplish, but you'll continue receiving updates. And I know that there's a whole lot of questions that you have for me and for the city as a whole, so I'm happy to take them. Why don't we get started?
Okay, thank you, Anders. We love your excitement. Obviously, being from the first district, you're going to know where a lot of our questions come from. So, let's start with Cushman. What is your vision for the Cushman site, and do you support making it a public community gathering space or park to serve growing North End populations and provide a third place for residents?
I think it's a sound idea. I want to make sure we're not putting the cart before the horse, that any sort of disposal or surplusing of the property involves community. And I think a lot of the things that we care about are not mutually exclusive. So whether it's a third space, whether it's something that's transit-oriented, I think that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. There are a number of examples of other cities that have done this, that have reworked public spaces, utility sites, surplus sites, or others. And where it makes the most sense, absolutely. But I think that as someone who's grown up here, I mean, I remember walking to watch Rocky Horror when I was a stadium kid at Saturday night, right? It's a neighborhood that's near and dear to my heart, and the more we can do to enhance not just the amenities there, but just people's ability to access them from all walks of life, I think it's a really good thing. I'm happy to help facilitate those conversations.
Well, we want to follow up with you more on that. So moving on to the budget, what are your ideas for encouraging economic development and for attracting good-paying jobs that will provide our city with a greater degree of economic strength and stability?
Well, a lot of it is place setting. So we don't control the economy, but we can definitely influence the conditions. And some of it is just the really boring stuff like we talked about, like just general public safety and homelessness. I mean, that there's a way to make areas feel inviting. There's a way that areas feel neglected or feel less than safe. And so really just, in some respects, getting a handle on the boring stuff done well, that's very crucial, right? But also a lot of it is the provisioning of certainty. So we've seen this already with the completion of the Tide-Flat Sub-Area Plan. Besides just being clear on something that was up in the air for a number of years, there are some really cool provisions there, like what's called, and this is getting super technical, what's called a pre-EIS. And what that means is an environmental impact statement, meaning that someone is thinking of investing in a manufacturing company or building something totally new there. We have already completed several steps as a city to let them know what they're getting into with various, whether it's environmental contamination or things that they need to mitigate to get things built. Now, something I'd like to do to take that a step further is I'd really be interested in exploring the idea of looking at successes that we've had, like in the Foss Waterway. That's one of the best examples of the city creating an organization like the Foss Waterway Development Authority, which was what's called the Public Development Agency. And are there ways that we could do something similar to encourage manufacturing, to encourage, especially of the kind of green jobs that we've identified? Those are things I'd be really interested in exploring. We also have another opportunity with Nally Valley, because we're going to be doing some master planning with the Nally Valley Manufacturing Center later this year. So to answer your question, I think that part of it is just the basic provision of certainty and stability in the neighborhood and just general quality of life. A lot of it is also just being a good regional partner to our schools, our parks, and just making sure that we're continuing to grow Tacoma's livability and accessibility for all. And also it's just doubling down on niches that we're uniquely poised to do well at. That's why I really like the Green Jobs program, is because it's not just about being everything to everyone. I mean, we should not necessarily just say yes to everything if it's not the right fit, if it's detrimental to Tacoma. But if something is aligned with things that are uniquely poised for us to do well, like I believe that we have a unique manufacturing strength, for example, but that particular plan calls out things that we could do really well, like say maritime manufacturing, green construction materials, energy like hydrogen of the future, for example, industrial symbiosis. Could we produce things that other businesses or even agencies need? Like, could we get a company there to make turbines for TPU, for example? So those are a few things that we're poised to do well. And if we do have that commitment, if we can align other agencies like the Chamber, the Economic Development Board, the county, if we can get everyone to largely agree to do these things that we already have a plan for, what can we do to align other agencies and other entities to make it work even better? So an obvious next step would be the school system. If we've identified a core sector that we can be uniquely competitive in, can we work more with the school system, our trade and technical in colleges and universities, for example, our workforce development agencies like Workforce Central, to not just make the land use and the rules business friendly to the sector we want, but how can we create more of the amenities that really attract investment, like our workforce, for example, or other such barriers that need to be removed, for instance. So that's where my mind goes, is how can we generally place set and how can we uniquely build on niches that we do the best.
So that sort of segues into the next question, which is, during the election, you said the city has not been well run. What specifically were you talking about, and what ideas do you have for changing that?
Well, the general perception, just speaking from people at the door, because that's where I derive a lot of my truth at, isn't that there are incompetent people in the city. I mean, I've worked with many of them who do a great job. It's more the perception of not the best follow through, and how can we better align things? So I'll give you one such example. So if we're talking about homelessness, for instance, and this, a lot of this, by the way, isn't just about the city government as a whole, right? I mean, that's just one of many things. I think being a regional leader, which is one of my aspirations for Tacoma, is about bringing the community along in its entirety, right? So homelessness is a wonderful example. I'm a very big believer in what's called the unified regional approach. That's the very nascent beginning phase of Tacoma, the county, surrounding cities, trying to have literally what it says in the title, a unified approach where we align our policies instead of just having the disparate patchwork that we've had that's not served anyone. And how can we do a better job of aligning those things, but not just within the unified approach. One such example is how we fund human services, how we fund homeless agencies, for instance. Anyone in that world will tell you it is rife with duplication. There are 30 more agencies all doing the same thing. And it's not the fault of anyone in that field necessarily, but it's the perverse incentive of how it's set up. It's a competitive funding system with a dwindling pool of resources. And so while we have the problems that we have, can we not have a more constructive conversation about, for example, can we at least have a single application form that all agencies can use, whether they're applying for money from the city, from the county, from private foundations like the Cheney Foundation or Greater Tacoma or any of the others, for example. So can there be greater collaboration and strategic alignment? And then finally, what are we doing when we fund organizations to bias the weight that we give on the basis of collaboration? So instead of generic funding on the basis of head count served, for example, or just general status quo criteria that we use, could we prioritize funding organizations that have a proven track record or a fleshed out plan for how they're actually going to work with other agencies, other nonprofits to do the same thing? So we're rewarding the opposite of duplication. How are we rewarding data sharing so that instead of people hoarding information on clients, we want to proceed to the dream would be what's called a by name list, which is where we have a real-time list of people shared between multiple agencies where we're keeping tabs and we actually have a clear idea in real time. So we're not only being as efficient and effective as possible with resources, but more people are being helped, fewer people are falling through the cracks. Those are one such example. So it's really not just about the city and its own individual mechanisms, but it's more about how we as a community can improve our effectiveness by working better together and with greater unifying strategy.
So, yeah, on the homeless, if we can bring it down to the practical level from the theoretical, how will you instruct city employees to handle homeless encampments? The question was specifically looking at the Garfield Gulch and other nearby areas, but it's sort of on that actual practical level rather than the overview.
Sure, and with a very big caveat that as a member of the council, right, which is what the mayor is, I'm not one who instructs the staff. Right? I mean, the charter actually forbids me from doing that. We can instruct the city manager collectively to do things, but I can seek information from individual members of the staff, but we have pretty strict separation of powers in basically our version of the city's constitution, where I can ask information of a member of the police department about what's going on, what happened with that 911 call, but I can't commandeer a CLO and say, hey, you need to do this right now. But to your question about what the practical reality is of enforcement, right, is that for me it's about balance. And this was a very big theme during the campaign when people were talking to me. It's not that people are averse to enforcement just like people are not averse to services, but there has to be a greater coordination between the two, right? There has to be a push and there has to be a pull. And that's why, for example, I'm very supportive of, on a regional level, the unified approach, but also on a more short-term, immediate level to relieve the burden, making sure there's adequate shelter space, because we've had that funding cut from the state legislature, for example. So it really does us no good to continue sweeping people from one neighborhood to another if there's nothing to send people to. People just get sent to an additional neighborhood until someone else complains and repeats the cycle. Yeah. But at the same time, people do have a need to use public spaces. People need to be able to take their kids or walk their kids to school or just be able to enjoy parks and whatnot without fear of actual health and safety issues. So it's a balancing act, and sophisticated people can have different opinions on this, and I think it's perfectly respectable. But for me, it really comes down to the appropriate balance between services and enforcement, and ensuring that people can absolutely continue to enjoy public spaces while ensuring that people have places to go, and that over the long term, we just have fewer people living on the streets in general. We're working longer term to keep people housed and move people beyond the system too.
Okay, you're standing in front of the neighborhood council logo, so let's talk about neighborhood How are you going to revitalize and enhance Tacoma's neighborhoods without displacing the lower income Tacoma households? So I think when we gave you this question, we explained there was sort of a background on that.
Right. And the thing is, we need to be a lot less zero-sum when it comes to housing, when it comes to development, and that's the unfortunate reality, is that we've always thought of this in terms of revitalization, in terms of things becoming nice, but at the expense of people being pushed out. I mean, that's what we've seen in Hilltop, that's what we've seen in other neighborhoods. And so for me, a lot of it comes down to smarter housing policy that leaves more options. So with Home in Tacoma, for example, which again, I'm a very big fan of adaptive reuse, which for everyone's information, what that means is, let's say that you wanted to, let's say you had someone with a beautiful Victorian home right, in the North Slope, or someone with a craftsman, like my 1905 house. And let's say someone wanted to have their mom live with them to age in place, or someone is on the opposite end, and maybe more of a senior and wanting to have a college kid live with them to help them pay the property taxes, or wanting to have their kids live with them, right? So multi-generational living is a very good example of one of the pros. How can we use our land use code, and I think our building code is another frontier we could explore. How can we do that to be less black and white, so that we're balancing these appropriate factors like historical character, for example, affordability, and access. So for me, I think that how you're going to get to greater affordability isn't necessarily from new construction, because I mean, North End, your average new home goes for over $1 million, right? And even in the South End, I mean, in the most affordable areas, new construction isn't anywhere cheaper than $550, $600, right? And so we still need it, right? Because ultimately, supply is a strong influence, not the only influence, but a strong influence on prices. But you also need to meet the appropriate area. What I mean by that is, we've seen so much growth, we've seen in some ways an oversupply of some of the newer, like 5/2 mid-rises downtown, for example. And a lot of those are vacant. I mean, it's kind of a common part of development. But your average, even if you are seeing an oversupply, even if you have seen more units to meet the demand, the people who rent those are not necessarily the people most in need. I mean, the average person who rents them is, someone who's not necessarily struggling to pay the rent in South Tacoma, for example, right? So your typical Tacoma family is not going to pay $2,500 for a one-bedroom downtown, right? I mean, they're not making any more 1980s Lakewood duplexes. That's the problem. It's not just about supply. This is where I sort of have to walk a fine line for people in the housing industry. The supply is a factor, but it's really about the segment of the supply, right? Which I would say on the owner side, you can't forget about that, it's all about starter homes. That's where there's tremendous shortage right now. And with today's interest rates, I mean, try buying a 2-bedroom, $400,000 South Tacoma bungalow, and your debt service is what, over $3,000 a month approximately? And so that's totally unsustainable. But for renters, for people, for whom it's a slight majority in Tacoma, that's where it gets really problematic. So I think part of how we address that is looking at conversions, and that's where adaptive reuse can also play a role. What I mean by that is, are there ways that we can allow for not wholesale demolition or change, but let's say, for a perfect example, someone with a split entry house. Those split entry houses that have the big basement rec room areas. That's a perfect place for someone who might want to just slap in a second kitchen, get a range stove, get a dishwasher, get a stackable washer dryer, and then that's an accessory dwelling unit. That's a place where mom could go. That's a place where a college kid could go. That's a place where your kids could go, or a home care worker, so you can age in place and live there longer, for example. And are there ways that we could work more with our community members? Could there be public-private partnership opportunities with local credit unions, for example, to make these more financially feasible for folks? Also, the average ADU is really expensive. It's almost $250,000 to build one. So if we're looking at our code, are there additional options like modular built or factory built homes that are still visually appealing, that are still built to quality, but aren't that expensive, right? So making sure that we're aware of all options, but in particular with an eye towards the places where the need is the greatest. That's what's, I think, not been as attenuated in the conversation, and where we need to talk about.
Somebody in the audience who would appreciate your last comment about the ADUs, because there was the stick-built requirement.
Right.
It's unaffordable.
Right.
So let's move across to infrastructure and environment. As mayor, how do you plan to support the new urban forestry priority action plan timeline as recently outlined by the IPS committee? This is, I think, getting back to that 30 by 30.
Yeah, 30 by 30, yeah, it's very ambitious. I think this is actually a really good timing for two reasons. One, Parks Tacoma, I almost said Metro Parks. I don't work for them, so I don't have to pay $1. But Parks Tacoma is besides their bond that they're putting out, that they periodically have to release what's called an ILA, interlocal agreement, because a lot of the places they manage are city-owned. And even if they're not city-owned, they're things like rights-of-way, for example. And I think that's really cool because that in my opinion, and what a lot of people who've been studying urban forestry can talk about, that's really where I think we can get the greatest rate of return most immediately for trees, forestry, and just native vegetation and greening our city in general is, it's not necessarily the open spaces so much as the thoroughfares, the corridors, the rights-of-way, the medians. We can stick a lot of green things there. And something I'm really interested in besides trees, because obviously trees are really essential for the heat island effect, for stormwater and everything, is making sure that when we talk about green in the city that we're not only focused on trees, because from a maintenance perspective, a budget perspective, and also attaining a lot of the same like carbon displacement goals, looking at native plants, looking at things like wild grasses, looking at what we've seen downtown with rain gardens. These things can be just as beautiful. They're very easy to maintain. You don't have to do anything to them. They're kind of native proof. And they do a load of good to, in some ways they're better for carbon sequestration than trees in some ways. Great for the salmon, great for water quality. So I'm interested in making sure we keep an open mind about what we're greening the city with, how we can work with Parks Tacoma through their bond process, through their interlocal agreement, and also, oh, thank you, yeah. Yammering all day, appreciate it. Starting to sound like Louis Armstrong up here. But it is a little world though. But also, what you'll be hearing as we get closer to the summer is as we revisit the concept of infrastructure funding. Because the city was going to have a very robust streets package. It did not pass at the ballot. I think there are a number of reasons for doing so. The reality is we need to do something. We need to do something to sustainably fund infrastructure. What I would like to do in the same spirit as what we were just talking about, homelessness and everything else, is how can there be greater strategic focus? And if we are focused more on, say, corridors, on activating spaces, on making our downtown feel like more of a downtown, on freight mobility for our port, for example, what a perfect marriage if we could take a look at that along with working with Parks Tacoma and finding a better way to integrate these things so that we're not only fixing potholes and repairing streets, but we're also making areas more accessible, safer, and also more beautiful and safe too.
So, following on that, what is your plan to properly implement the Vision Zero and make pedestrian safety a priority? We're specifically talking about a great example of 21st, where there's no proper pedestrian access.
Yeah, I was there on council when we first had those conversations about what we can do to reduce the lanes and make it an actual multimodal safe road. I'm still very supportive of that, and I keep hope alive for 21st in that respect. I've walked around the city and I've seen wonderful examples of how it's done right. I mean, if you're ever in the South End, for example, the east side, go down to East 64th, just off of Pacquiao. I mean, it is beautiful. This is all the best practices. We're starting to see that on South Sheridan or Lake Wapato, for example. And we know what to do. It's just a question of prioritization and funding. And for me, it comes down to two things. One is making sure there's an abundance of certainty for the funding of these services and appropriate focus. I think that's where some kind of infrastructure measure comes in. But also, a lot of this comes down to just the administrative culture, the culture of the city, and making sure that we insist on a culture of follow-through. I mean, we've had so many policies that we just don't implement, or we only partially implement, or we get to it when we get to it. Like we have a 21-point plan of anti-displacement, for example, policies for the Affordable Housing Action Strategy. We've implemented maybe 8 or 9 of those steps, and we've only started doing this, and I was just a second-term councilman when we first implemented it, right? So what can we do about following our own lead, basically? And what can we do about making sure that when we do set our mind towards insisting that big capital projects are more aligned towards Vision Zero policy priorities, that we are being as multimodal as we can, about narrowing lanes, insisting on medians, just all the best practices to make these thoroughfares more inclusive, safer, more visually beautiful. Back to neighborhood revitalization, right? I mean, revitalization doesn't just simply mean more expensive prices. It means greater accessibility. It means more people can use these things, right? And that to me is really what it comes down to, is making sure on the policy level we're adequately resourcing, but on the administrative level, which is very relevant to the council because in the next quarter, we're hiring a city manager. So this is absolutely one of the things that I'm going to insist on. It's one of my key must-haves is what we can do to build that culture within the organization too, so that we're following through.
Well, we look forward to working with you on that, but
Yeah.
we feel that the neighborhood council program hasn't been properly included in some of those transportation efforts. And we would just point out to the transportation user fee that was just enacted that has absolutely no projects in the North End whatsoever.
Talking about the recent impact fee.
Yes. Staying on the environment, as a former conservation board member, do you agree Tacoma's aging sewage treatment plants need technology upgrades? And what is your plan to stop delaying and instead meet Clean Water Act requirements?
It is old infrastructure. It's not just limited to the sewer utility. I mean, that's one of the recurring problems of managing a 100-year-old city. What I will say is that there are a lot of different ways to slice it, but I think the way forward, because we're talking about very, very pricey utility upgrades, right? If all done at once, the impact on your monthly rates would be pretty high, right? But at the same time, we can't just ignore problems and defer maintenance and things that need to get done. So something I'm really interested in doing is, especially as the legislative session unfolds, because this is something that our delegation is thinking a lot about too, our people in the House and the Senate, is what can we do to work with the Department of Ecology to ensure that we're trending towards cleaner public areas, that we're trending towards getting more modern infrastructure, but in a way that's prudent, that is in full legal agreement with our obligations, and just making sure that there's a path forward that, on the one hand, doesn't break the bank, on the other hand, doesn't just kick the can down the road further. So I'm happy to try to make sure the city leads in a thoughtful direction there.
Okay, we've got some questions on economic development, which you sort of touched on, so I'm just going to read them out and then just sort of add in what we missed. So what new incentives will you implement to attract new business to Tacoma and grow the tax base? Has the city discussed how to make the downtown corridor more attractive to pedestrians and how to attract and retain local businesses downtown with concrete actions on that? And what is your plan to address long vacant commercial properties, including the vacant buildings on MLK that have sat for years?
Sure. So I'll address those, and I might need your help to touch on all of those. It's a robust list. I appreciate robustness, though. So for me, incentives, it's a bit of a funny word because people always take free money, right? I mean, what business, what investor, what property developer is not going to take an incentive, right? The question is, what are you getting for them? And so for me, when it comes to the businesses that we have shed or we have grown, or when did all the buildings start in the first place, a lot of it comes down less to what the city has done or not done. A lot of it's just changing market conditions. I mean, we've had a multifamily housing credit on the books for umpteen years before I was a graduate of high school, basically. And yet we only started seeing a big building boom in the downtown and in mixed-use neighborhood centers ever since probably 2014 or so, 2012 to 2014. And was it anything to do with these incentives, or was it just the rent increasing? Was it just market conditions pointing to the fact that made these things more likely to happen? And so for me, it's back to setting the table, back to placemaking. It's really less about, can we dangle a gimmick in front of someone, which I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but that's what your average person thinks when they think of an incentive. And I think it's more about what are we uniquely poised to do well, and what do those people need, and providing that. So it's more about creating an ecosystem, and that's very specific to what we're looking at. So one thing that I think of that repeatedly gets called out in the Tide Flat Suburban plan, for example, is pollution, is what are called brownfields. So in the Tide Flat sub area, and also in Alley Valley, we've had heavy industry for over 100 years, and we didn't have the most enlightened practices or an EPA for most of that time. And so most of those parcels, besides being incredibly unhealthy, I mean, you don't want to, lick your hand if you touch the dirt there, right? But also, it's virtually unbuildable. I mean, no one wants to take on that level of liability and cleanup. And so if we take a look at that, for example, as a definable concrete thing, then the question becomes, what do we want and how do we get there? And then that, for example, do we look at public development authorities? Do we look at other means of speeding up the cleanup so as to actually release things for development? That's where my mind goes when I think of an incentive, is less, less a freebie or a tax break or, something, right? Like, let's get Amazon headquarters here or some stuff like that, versus what are industries that are specifically poised to do well here that we can do better than most places? What are the specific needs to build a cluster, and then how do we do those things to place set? Which, by the way, I think is also good for another reason, which is retention. It's not just about growing business sectors, but I mean, as we've seen businesses come and go, I mean, historically, like Weyerhaeuser, but also Russell, Data, State Farm, getting a large player, and now Rockwest, getting a large player isn't necessarily beneficial if they're just going to go at some point, if there's frailty in the attachment there. And so I think having a sector that you're uniquely poised to do well, like really doubling down on a city's comparative economic advantages, besides just being more efficient and more productive, I think it also insulates you a lot against the business cycle, because if people are poised here because this is the best place to make cross-laminated timber, for example, then they're not just going to pull up and relocate to Kent or Spokane or Roy or wherever, right? Because there's a reason they came here in the first place. So that's the first question. So your second question was about downtown?
Yeah, downtown. We have, in the north end, we see more and more development in Proctor. Mm-hmm. And what we want to know is, why isn't that development going into the place where there's space for it, instead of adding to the congestion around that area?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it just comes down to market signals, right? It's the same reason why richer areas see more development than poor areas. It's because construction costs are fixed and rent is variable. So it generally costs the same to employ a team of builders. It generally costs the same to get permits. It generally costs the same to buy building materials. But you can charge very different rent in Stadium than you can in Lincoln, for example. And so that's why some things get built in certain areas more than others. It's all just market signals. And so if you do want to see more things in areas, you have to do something. You either have to incentivize, or you have to do something else. You have to remove some barriers in a different way. And so for downtown, and this is more than just housing, this is also just about economic development in general. Downtown has always struggled, in my opinion, because it's not really a downtown. It's not really shaped and focused like one. We are not just the victims of the mall. I mean, that was one thing that really hurt a lot of downtowns. But we were victims of our own decisions in reaction to the mall, because we ran with urban renewal. We ran with, how do we out-mall the mall downtown? How do we make the downtown even more suburban? How do we just put strip mall style, service level parking lots and parking garages? How do we widen streets and just cars, right? Which turns out if people want to do that, they just drive to the mall. They don't go downtown and have to pay for parking, right? And so over the long term, it's undoing that, right? And that's where things like the street measure come in. That's where things like taking a look at actually making infrastructure that's more conducive to just like you said, more multimodal transportation. I mean, if you look at the places in downtown that actually are doing okay, that actually have an organic, like a nightlife to them, dare I say, like around Wood City, around Matador, the Knicks, to an extent UWT, or different types of users, it's no accident because the infrastructure and the alignment of the neighborhood support it. It's more tightly packed, it's more conducive, it just feels more urban. So the more we can do that, I'm not saying build it and they will come, but build it and they'll stop leaving at least. So it's about harm reduction. And over the short term, it's also just basic stuff, safety, making sure homeless individuals get the help they need and we can relieve the overall burden on the system. So that was your other question about downtown. What were the other two?
And then Martin Luther King, vacant buildings.
Yeah. So vacant buildings are tricky because it's just like homelessness. There's no single group, right? I mean, like with homelessness, the needs of just working class people who just don't make enough to pay cost of living are very different from like a kid aging out of the foster care system, or someone who's very low barrier who's dealing with schizophrenia while also being hooked on fentanyl, right? I mean, very, very different needs, different strategies. Same thing for properties, right? For some areas, is there something that is clearly a drag on them? Like a really good example of something that wasn't necessarily vacancy, but just a really challenged area was Hosmer. And it's not like Hosmer has totally arrived, right? But compared to where it was 4 years ago, it has markedly improved. I own a rental around Hosmer. I drive around there sometimes, and turning sleazy hotels into apartments, it turns out, is a great way of reducing crime, right? And so that's an example of dealing with an environmental problem, right? So sometimes it comes down to just dealing with a recurring problem that's just harming the environment. Sometimes the property owners just have no incentive to do it, and this might be a conversation for, do we need sticks along with carrots? You know, do you need something like a vacancy tax to basically force someone to either make tenant improvements to get someone in there, or to sell it or refinance it to someone who wants to actually take it on and deal with it, right? And not just simply with developing commercial properties, but also a recurring thing that I just saw with my own eyes was encampments or other activity on private property that no one really cared about because it's just a checked out slumlord or just a checked out of state LLC. I mean, I saw one encampment just in the McKinley area off the railroad tracks near 72nd, and very curious encampment, by the way. Like, they actually built a treehouse, like a very suspiciously well-built treehouse too. I'm not kidding, but and yet looking at the plat map, and according to the city's HEAL team, they had all sorts of recurring problems with it because this was an out-of-state LLC. It was vacant land, and they just didn't care. They were just land banking on it, basically. And I think there has to be, especially when there are recurring criminal or just health and safety issues, like code enforcement or recurring areas of crime, I think there might have to be a conversation about how do we hold people more accountable. I mean, see also drug houses, right? I mean, if there's just such a checked out landlord who just does not care, and there's just a recurring parade of horribles, can we make it easier to, on the property level, on the code level, to move things along so neighbors get relief?
Okay, we're now going to finish on your strength with our housing area and rents. So short-term rentals, what do you intend to do to regulate and limit short-term rentals given concerns that they reduce long-term rental supply and force home buyers to compete with investors?
Sure, well I voted for some of the first regulations that came in line with this back in 2013, I want to say, so it was some of the first Airbnb type regulations. I'm truthfully not aware of the extent of the issue. In theory, they have to be licensed, so I think that'd be a great question to bring up with, maybe that could be a staff thing we look up, is the amount of business licenses owned by short-term rentals compared to landlords, for instance, and is there an appreciable amount that's taking up what could be long-term rentals, for example? What I do know is that, generally speaking, they're disproportionately single families because condos usually don't allow short-term rentals. It's usually an HOA thing, for example. Anecdotally, I don't see too much that's Airbnb or Vrbo, or the big one right now is actually Furnished Finder. That's for travel nurses. And part of that is less to do with regulation and more to do with, you guessed it, markets. There was a huge boom in short-term rentals and just a lot of risky kind of casino behavior for real estate investors around the pandemic, just because debt was super cheap and people thought they could be Airbnb barons or whatever. But a lot of those people have either been converting them to conventional rentals or just disposing of them and like using a 1031 tax exchange. Mostly just because the rate environment or just the economic environment changed because there was an oversupply, and you can no longer charge 100 and change per month. You have to settle for 80 or 90 or whatever, and so I'm happy to look into it though. I mean, if there is a large appreciable amount that could be rentals, then that's very much a policy consideration, and if it's just a smaller niche, then that's relevant too. But either way, there's no harm in checking.
Okay, and here's your final question. So, housing supply and rents, what evidence or analysis do you rely on regarding the relationship between increased apartment supply, vacancy rates, and rents in Tacoma, especially given the concerns that vacancies persist even as rents rise?
Sure, I saw that email. So, a variety of information sources. I mean, there's Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example. There's information from local economists, like UWT, for example. There's my own realtor brethren. I mean, there's the multiple listing service that they have those kinds of measurements. Supply and demand isn't black and white, like we were just talking about with apartments. For instance, it's not necessarily cause and effect. There is a lot of subtlety. There is a lot of nuance to it. Generally speaking, though, if demand is constant for something and there's less of it, usually prices will go up, usually. And again, as a general rule, if demand is constant and the amount of things that there are goes up, then usually prices stagnate and fall, usually. Now in practice, markets are not perfect, and that's the first thing they teach you in econ class, right? And there are a lot of distortions, obviously. There's some, for example, in Seattle, they took a look at allegations of price fixing by property managers. I'm not sure to what extent they visited that or where that's going, if any place in Tacoma. I mean, I just have a couple of rentals and I just look at Zillow when I price things. But there are some concerns there. But I mean, for me, like as a policymaker, the big thing I come down to is how are things working in practice. And for me, it's more about where are the sectors of demand? Because maybe over the long term, over 10, 15, 20 years, those mid-rises they're building downtown might provide some spillover rental opportunities for other people, maybe. But the reality is that for people in the here and now and in the short term, like I was saying, your average person trying to make ends meet in the Lincoln District or in Salishan, for example, they're not going to spend a couple $1,000s for a one-bedroom downtown, right? I mean, what their needs are something that's more conducive to their more immediate situation. And so what I think smart policy is going to focus on is, sure, you can't go wrong by increasing aggregate supply, but I mean, just like if you build more, does anyone know where Canterwood is in Gig Harbor?
Yeah.
Right. If you build a $2 million house in Canterwood, I mean, if it's new, it's probably $3 million. That's going to take a while to trickle down, right? I mean, we all know how well trickle down economics works, right? But I mean, if you build more Point Ruston luxury condos with views, I mean, that's not going to become affordable housing anytime soon, right? That's not at any point going to relieve the burden, right? So it's a little bit more sophisticated than just an aggregate increase. What smart policy should focus on is where the biggest gaps are, which for me goes to starter homes and rentals that are conducive to families. So rentals that are like 2-bedroom or higher, sufficient square footage for a family near bus lines, near schools. How can we specifically engender the creation of more units in those realms? That'll have the greatest effect on affordability.
How about a wonderful big round of applause? At the beginning of your term, and we hope we see you in a year's time and get on to it. This was wonderful. Thank you very much. As I mentioned, we did get a lot of questions, so we'll send the questions across to you and your staff, because it is interesting to see what people are involved in.
Okay. I have to be a 4-year-old,
so. Next month's meeting is going to be on affordable housing. We have Ty Moore from Tacoma for All who will be speaking to us, and we also are hoping to see, somebody mentioned our new council member, Latasha Palmer, who is an at-large, so she represents us. So, I've got to come over here. I think we've run pretty well. Is there any new business or old business? If not, I'm going to move to adjourn, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you very much.